They were running before they were reading. The first audience of the book of James was not sitting in a comfortable congregation debating fine points of theology. They were scattered. The Greek word James uses in his opening line is diaspora, the term used for the Jewish people dispersed across the Roman world after catastrophe, war, persecution, displacement. Believers who had fled Jerusalem after the death of Stephen, after the violence that followed, carrying what they could and leaving the rest. And to these people, exhausted, frightened, trying to figure out what faith even looks like when your house is gone and your community is broken apart across 1,000 miles of hostile territory, James does not write a theological treatise. He does not open with doctrine. He does not open with comfort exactly either. He opens with something almost nobody expects. Consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds. Joy to refugees. And before you decide that sounds either naive or cruel, read what comes next, because James is about to write the most practical, most uncomfortable, most relentlessly honest letter in the entire New Testament, and it is going to ask you a question that most modern Christianity has found very effective ways to avoid.
Before we open the letter, we need to understand who wrote it, because the identity of James is one of the most quietly explosive facts in the entire New Testament, and almost nobody sits with what it actually means. James was the brother of Jesus, not a follower who joined later, not a disciple who encountered him as a teacher, a brother, someone who grew up in the same house, who watched Jesus learn to walk, who sat across from him at meals for 30 years, who knew him not as the Messiah, but as the older sibling who never quite fit the family's expectations for what an oldest son should be doing. And here is what the Gospels record, with almost no commentary. Mark 3:21, when Jesus' ministry began drawing crowds and controversy, his family went to take charge of him. He is out of his mind, they said. John 7:5 is even more direct, for even his own brothers did not believe in him. James did not believe in his brother. For 30 years, James watched Jesus and did not see what the rest of history would eventually see. And then something changed. Because by the time we reach Acts 15, James is not a skeptic anymore. He is the leader of the Jerusalem church.
The most influential Christian leader in the most important city in the early Christian movement. Paul, writing to the Galatians, refers to James as one of the pillars of the church, alongside Peter and John. What happened? 1 Corinthians 15:7 gives us the answer in a single understated line, buried in Paul's list of resurrection appearances. Then he appeared to James. The resurrected Jesus appeared to his brother. And the brother who had spent 30 years seeing nothing extraordinary in the person across the table became, after the resurrection, one of the most respected leaders in the entire early church. This detail matters enormously for how you read this letter, because James is not writing as an outside admirer of Jesus. He is not writing from secondhand reports or theological reasoning about who Jesus might have been. He grew up with him. He doubted him. He saw him after death. And everything in this letter, every uncomfortable demand, every confrontational question, is written by someone who knows, in the most intimate way a human being can know anything, exactly what it costs to actually believe that the man you grew up with was God.
If you have read Paul's letters and then turn to James, something feels different almost immediately. Paul builds arguments, long sentences, theological scaffolding, justification, then sanctification, then glorification, careful architecture, one idea supporting the next. James does not build arguments in the same way. James gives commands, 54 imperatives in 108 verses. That is not an estimate. Scholars have counted. Roughly one command for every 2 verses. Consider it joy. Let perseverance finish its work. Ask God. Don't doubt. Don't say, if it is the Lord's will, carelessly. Be quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to anger. Get rid of moral filth. Do not merely listen to the word. Look after orphans and widows. Don't show favoritism. Don't judge your neighbor. And almost nobody asks why. Why does this letter read less like a theological essay and more like a list of instructions from someone who does not have time to walk you gently to the conclusion? Here is the answer. James belongs to a genre of ancient Jewish literature called wisdom literature. Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, short, punchy, often unconnected statements about how to actually live. Not abstract, not theoretical, practical. The kind of writing produced by people who do not have the luxury of philosophical leisure, people whose communities are under pressure, whose lives require immediate answers to immediate questions. How do I treat the poor person who just walked in? What do I do with anger? What does it mean that my tongue can destroy what years of relationship built? James writes like someone who has watched a community fracture under exactly these pressures and is trying, urgently, to prevent it from fracturing further. And this is where the modern parallel becomes impossible to avoid, because human beings still do this today. We confuse theological correctness with spiritual maturity. We can articulate exactly what we believe while living in ways that have almost no relationship to it. James was written for exactly this gap, the gap between what you say you believe and what your life actually demonstrates. And the most famous line in the entire letter is about to make that gap impossible to ignore.
James 2:17. Faith by itself, if it is not accompanied by action, is dead. This single verse has generated 500 years of theological controversy. Because at first glance, and especially when read against Paul's emphatic statements that we are saved by grace through faith, not by works, James 2 looks like it is contradicting the entire gospel. Martin Luther famously struggled with this letter. He called it, in a moment of frustration, an epistle of straw, because it seemed to threaten the doctrine that had become the center of his theological recovery of grace. But read what James actually says, not what people assume he says. James 2:14. What good is it, my brothers and sisters, if someone claims to have faith but has no deeds? Can such faith save them? He is not asking, can deeds save you? He is asking, can faith that produces nothing save you? And then James gives an example that should stop every reader cold. James 2:15-16. Suppose a brother or a sister is without clothes and daily food. If one of you says to them, go in peace, keep warm and well fed, but does nothing about their physical needs, what good is it? Go in peace, keep warm and well fed. These are not insults, these are blessings, pious words, spiritually appropriate words, the kind of things said in churches every week. And James says, what good is it? Read that carefully. He is not condemning belief, he is condemning belief that has become entirely verbal, a system of correct words disconnected from any cost, any inconvenience, any actual movement toward the person in front of you.
And then, James 2:19, the verse that should be more famous than almost anything else in this letter. You believe that there is one God. Good. Even the demons believe that and shudder. The demons have correct theology. Read that again. The demons of Scripture are not described as confused about who God is. They know exactly who He is. James 2:19 says they shudder. The Greek phresusin, they tremble, they recoil in horror. Their theology is accurate. Their fear is appropriate. And it changes nothing about what they are. This is the gap James is exposing. Correct belief, even belief accompanied by appropriate emotional response, even belief that produces trembling, is not by itself evidence of transformation. The demons believe correctly and remain demons. Which means the question James is asking is not, do you believe the right things? It is, has what you believe actually moved you? Has it moved your hands toward the cold person? Has it moved your wallet toward the hungry one? Has it moved your schedule, your comfort, your plans? Because if belief has not moved anything, if it sits in the mind as correct information while the body continues exactly as it would if none of it were true, James says that belief is dead. Not weak, not immature, dead. Same word used for a corpse. The form is there, the function is gone.
There is an image in James 1 that is so simple it is almost embarrassing, and so accurate that it should be uncomfortable for almost everyone who has ever attended a church service. James 1:23-24. Anyone who listens to the word but does not do what it says is like someone who looks at his face in a mirror and after looking at himself, goes away and immediately forgets what he looks like. A man looks in a mirror. He sees something, dirt on his face, disheveled hair, something that needs attention, and then he walks away and forgets. Not denies, not argues with the mirror, forgets. The information was accurate, the reflection was true, nothing about the message was wrong. But nothing changed because the information never converted into action before the moment of clarity faded. And this is where the story becomes painfully relevant to anyone who has ever sat in a service, felt something move, nodded along with a convicting point, and then, by the time they reached the parking lot, had already returned to exactly who they were when they walked in. The word was heard, the reflection was seen, and then forgotten. Not because the word was weak, because hearing was treated as the destination rather than the starting point.
James 1:25 describes the alternative. But whoever looks intently into the perfect law that gives freedom and continues in it, not forgetting that they have heard, but doing it, they will be blessed in what they do. Looks intently. The Greek is parakipsos, to bend over, to look closely, the posture of someone examining something carefully, not glancing. Continues. Not a single moment of clarity, an ongoing posture. Not forgetting, but doing. The blessing is not in the hearing. It is in the doing that follows the hearing before the hearing has had time to fade. And almost nobody notices the timing implication here. There is a window. Between the moment of clarity and the moment forgetting sets back in, there is a window. And what you do inside that window determines whether the clarity was transformation or merely information. This is why James spends so little time on theological explanation and so much time on commands, because commands are designed for the window. They are not designed to be understood. They are designed to be done immediately before the mirror's reflection fades and the face returns to whatever it was before.
James 3 contains one of the most psychologically penetrating passages in all of ancient literature about a single organ, the tongue. James 3:5. The tongue is a small part of the body, but it makes great boasts. Consider what a great forest is set on fire by a small spark. And then, James 3:6, the line that should unsettle anyone who has ever sent a message they regretted, said something in anger they couldn't take back, or watched a relationship fracture over words that took 3 seconds to say and years to undo. The tongue also is a fire, a world of evil, set on fire by hell. But James is not finished. And what comes next is the part almost nobody quotes, because it is the part that implicates everyone, including the speaker. James 3:9-10. With the tongue we praise our Lord and Father, and with it we curse human beings who have been made in God's likeness. Out of the same mouth come praise and cursing. My brothers and sisters, this should not be. The same mouth. The mouth that sings worship on Sunday morning is, by Wednesday afternoon, capable of tearing apart a coworker's reputation in a conversation that feels completely justified at the time. The same mouth that prays for the world can, within the same day, speak about a specific person in the world with a contempt that would be unthinkable if that person could hear it.
James 3:11-12 makes the point with images drawn directly from the agricultural world his readers knew. Can both fresh water and salt water flow from the same spring? My brothers and sisters, can a fig tree bear olives or a grapevine bear figs? Neither can a salt spring produce fresh water. A spring produces what is in its source. A tree produces fruit consistent with its nature. And the tongue, James is arguing, is not actually the problem. The tongue is a symptom. It reveals what is in the source. And this is one of the most uncomfortable diagnostic tools in the entire Bible, because it means that the words you speak without thinking, the comments that escape before you've had time to filter them, the things you say about people when you're tired or hurt or comfortable enough to stop performing, those words are not anomalies. They are samples, taken from the actual spring, not the curated public reservoir you present when you know you're being observed. What most people miss is this. James is not primarily concerned with what you say in public. He is concerned with what your unguarded speech reveals about what is actually in you, because the tongue does not create the contents of the heart, it reports them.
James 2 opens with a scene that should feel uncomfortably familiar to anyone who has ever walked into a room and watched in real time how differently people are treated based on what they appear to have. James 2, 2-3. Suppose a man comes into your meeting wearing a gold ring and fine clothes, and a poor man in shabby clothes also comes in. If you show special attention to the man wearing fine clothes and say, "Here's a good seat for you," but say to the poor man, "You sit better," have you not discriminated? The scene is mundane. No violence, no dramatic injustice, just seating arrangements. A good seat for one person, a "sit there" for another. And James calls this what it actually is. James 2:4. Have you not discriminated against them and become judges with evil thoughts? Judges with evil thoughts. Not you made an understandable social mistake. Not you're simply more comfortable with people like yourself. Evil thoughts. Because what is actually happening in that moment of differentiated seating is a judgment about value. The wealthy man is judged to be worth accommodating. The poor man is judged to be worth tolerating. And nobody said any of this out loud. Nobody needed to. The seating arrangement said it for them.
And then James does something that should function like a verdict delivered in slow motion. James 2:5. Has not God chosen those who are poor in the eyes of the world to be rich in faith and to inherit the kingdom he promised those who love him? God's selection criteria ran in the opposite direction from the seating arrangement. And James 2:6 makes the indictment explicit. But you have dishonored the poor. Has not God chosen the poor? But you have dishonored them. This is where the letter becomes genuinely dangerous, in the sense that it cannot be domesticated without doing violence to what it actually says. Because this is not abstract theology. This is a description of how a community that claims to follow a poor, homeless rabbi from Nazareth, who was himself by every economic metric poor, systematically arranges itself around the comfort and approval of people who by his own teaching are in spiritual danger because of their wealth. And the deeper reason matters. It is not that wealth is evil or that poverty is automatically virtuous. It is that the seating arrangement reveals what the community actually worships, regardless of what it sings about on Sunday. You can tell what a community values not by its statements of faith, but by who gets the good seat. James 5 ends the letter with a passage that has produced some of the most intense theological debate in church history, and also some of its most quietly devastating honesty. James 5:14-15. Is anyone among you sick? Let them call the elders of the church to pray over them and anoint them with oil in the name of the Lord. And the prayer offered in faith will make the sick person well. This passage has been used to build entire theological systems around healing. It has also been used to shame people whose prayers were not followed by healing, as though the absence of recovery proved the absence of faith. But notice what James does next. He does not move from sickness to a triumphant declaration that all prayer produces immediate physical results. He moves, James 5:16, to confession. Therefore confess your sins to each other and pray for each other so that you may be healed. To each other. Not confess privately to God in the quiet of your own mind, where no one else will ever know and nothing about your relationships will have to change. To each other. Out loud. To another person, in a relationship that continues after the confession is made. And this, almost nobody connects this, follows directly from everything else in the letter. Because if faith without works is dead, and if the tongue reveals what is in the heart, and if favoritism reveals what a community actually worships, then confession that stays entirely private, entirely between you and God, entirely unaccompanied by any change in your relationships or any cost to your reputation, is exactly the kind of faith James has spent 5 chapters calling dead.
Confession to each other is faith with works. It is the mirror that is not forgotten. It is the tongue, finally, producing fresh water instead of salt. And James's final image, the closing verses of the letter, is not a benediction. It is not grace and peace to you. James 5:19-20. My brothers and sisters, if one of you should wander from the truth, and someone should bring that person back, remember this. Whoever turns a sinner from the error of their way will save them from death and cover over a multitude of sins.
The letter ends mid-action. Not with a theological summary, not with a doxology, with someone going after someone else. The letter that began with refugees ends with rescue. And the entire space between those 2 points, the 54 commands, the mirror, the tongue, the seating arrangements, the confession, is the answer to a question James never states directly, but that hangs over every line. What does it actually look like to live as though what you believe is true?
For 2,000 years, various traditions have tried to manage what James actually says. Some have elevated it to the point of nearly replacing grace with performance, turning James's commands into a checklist for earning what was always meant to be received. Others, like Luther in his moment of frustration, have tried to minimize it, to keep it at arm's length from the doctrines that feel more theologically secure. But James keeps surviving these attempts, because what James is actually doing is not offering an alternative to grace. He is describing what grace, once it has actually entered a person, inevitably produces. Not as a transaction, do these things to earn salvation, but as a diagnosis. If salvation has happened, here is what it will look like. And the diagnosis is uncomfortable, precisely because it is so checkable. You cannot verify someone's internal theological convictions. You cannot audit what they privately believe about grace, about justification, about the nature of faith. But you can observe the seating arrangement. You can hear what the tongue produces when no one important is listening. You can notice whether the mirror's reflection changed anything by the time the person reached the door. This is why James has survived every attempt to soften it, because the questions it asks are not questions that can be answered with better theology. Does your faith move your hands toward the cold person? What does your tongue produce when you're not performing? Who gets the good seat in your life and why? When the mirror shows you something true, what happens next? These are not questions about what you believe. They are questions about what your life has already answered, whether you intended it to or not.